Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's Irene, and today's video is all about my best sewing tips, things that I figured out throughout my own sewing journey. I hope that they're going to be useful to you as well. Let's go! So my first tip is to keep a sewing journal. This is mine and I keep it in a format similar to a bullet journal system. It's very helpful to me because it helps me keep track of my projects. It helps me remember the lessons I learned because I have pages called lessons learned, and it helps me keep everything in check with project trackers, lists, etc. and also checklists before I even start a new project. So for example, in this checklist I can write what I do before I start a project, such as changing the needle, cleaning the machine, and it's just very useful and it leaves nothing to chance. You don't get distracted and forget something crucial this way. So the next tip is the most important tip. I think it's the one that you should never ever skip, because it makes your projects look 100 times more professional. It's very simple to do and it also hides so many of your mistakes if you're a beginner. It just makes it way better and easier to sew. That is pressing. You press as you go. You sew on a seam, you open it up with your fingers, you finger press a little bit, and then you press it hot with your iron. If you sew on a dot, you use a cushion, for example a pressing ham, and you press it. Immediately as soon as you sew on it, you're going to see a huge difference, and it's also going to be way easier to go ahead with the other steps. So the next step is another step which is very crucial and you should never skip. It is stay stitching. A lot of people I find skip stay stitching, and I think that's a big mistake because it's something that will avoid a lot of problems that are going to be unfixable if you don't do it. For example, gaping neck holes, easily stretching fabrics, such as I find linen, for example, it warps a lot, is going to gape, and even if you try to be so gentle with your fabric when you're sewing it, you are going to stretch it out with even tiny movements, and then it's going to be hard to or impossible to fix it afterwards. It's just a very simple solution, and it's also going to keep your seams from fraying as you sew it as well. So don't skip stay stitching. So the next tip is another crucial step that seems unnecessary and is often forgotten, just like the stay stitching of before. That is understitching. If you don't know what I mean by understitching, I'm going to put some useful videos from other channels down in the description box. But what I mean by understitching is it's something that helps facings or linings stay down and not poke out like that, by stitching the facing together with the seam allowances. So it's invisible from the top, and you take the facing and you sew it to the seam allowance. It's not top stitching. You can watch other videos to understand this better, but it gives such a professional look and it just makes it look way better, way more, it doesn't look homemade anymore. So the next step is for those impatient people out there like me. It's very important when you start a project, if you don't know something, for example, let's say you already cut your fabric and you've already started your project and you've seen the instructions, which you should have read at first before you began, but let's say you didn't. It tells you that you need to insert a zipper and you never inserted a zipper before. So in that moment, don't just start trying without knowing what you're doing. Stop, take a scrap fabric, a piece of zipper, and just open YouTube, search for videos, understand and learn, and then go and apply that knowledge to your actual garment. First learn, take time to research and do it on your scrap fabric, and then use that information in your sewing project. This way you're not going to have unprofessional looking projects, as well as you're not going to have to unpick every time you try a new thing. So this next step is related to the previous one. This one is making mock-ups before you actually make your garment with your real fabric. So you can use a scrap fabric to make the shell of the garment. You don't need to make every single part of it. You can make just the shell of it without the facings and stuff. Remember to stay stitch that one as well. That's also really important. This will allow you, of course, to understand the steps better, because sometimes even if you read the instructions of the sewing pattern, you almost always miss something because they are just really sentences that bend your mind. It also helps you fit your garments. Sewing patterns usually don't fit right out of the package. Also, it helps you make your first try on a scrap fabric so that your real fabric is going to be 100% not wasted. That's a really important step. It helps you exercise a lot, and it's a very good way of learning to sew and not feeling that huge pressure before you cut your actual fabric. So the next step is similar to the previous one again. It is to read your instructions a few times, not just one time, because instructions, I find, especially in vintage sewing patterns, are very unclear. Back in those days, people knew sewing way more commonly than we do today, and there are so many things that a sewing pattern is going to just quickly touch without really explaining, or not explain at all, or even it's going to explain it in a sentence together with 5 other things. It's just one tiny sentence with 10 different explanations that you're supposed to understand. So you need to really read it very carefully. I even, when I find that a sentence is not clear enough, I take notes on top of my sewing pattern and explain it clearly in my own words. That's really important. It's going to save you a lot of mistakes. Next is investing in good quality cutter blades or shears, scissors, whatever you're using to cut your fabric, and not use them to cut anything but fabric. Don't use them to cut your sewing patterns, any other papers. Don't give them to anybody else. Keep them and buy the best one you can buy, because you know there are a lot of things in sewing where you can save money on, because it doesn't really matter if you buy a really high quality one or not. It doesn't affect your result, but the scissors, the blades of your cutter, they really do. Not only does it make your edges sharp and clear, if you're a beginner you want this clarity so that your sewing lines are in exactly the correct spot, but it also makes it easier for you to not go back and forth and accidentally cut into your actual sewing pattern. This is something that you shouldn't cheap out on. Blades and scissors and shears. Next step is to keep the inside of your garment as neat and well made as the outside. You know, it's very easy to say, well, we're not going to see it anyway, and you might not be finishing your seam allowances, or you might be making it sort of sloppy, but let me tell you, it's going to be not the same when you wear it. The feeling and knowing that the inside of it is not well made, it's going to live a lot longer, your garment, if you pay attention to actually finish the seams nicely and press as you go, and really make sure that the inside is as well made as the outside. Is going to be a huge difference for you, and your garment is going to last you a lot longer. So lastly, one of the best tips is to actually take care of things before you even start sewing. Sewing is 70% preparation, if not 90%. So make sure your sewing machine, your serger is clean. Make sure you change those needles, you thread correctly, and you test in a piece of your actual fabric the interfacing you're going to use, the thread, the thread tension, the foot, different feet, different seam finishes. All of these things need to be decided before, and you need to check if they actually work on your current fabric. This is going to be, in fact, the most important thing about sewing. Doing things before you start testing. This is super important. Never, ever, ever skip this. So these are all of my tips for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope my tips were useful to you. If you have other tips that I haven't included here, please let me know in the comments so that we can all see and learn from each other. Have a great day and see you in the next video. Bye!